In this edition of the Red and Blue Political Roundup, President Trump now says the GOP will be the, quote, party of great health care. The president made those comments one day after announcing a new Republican focus on the issue. Earlier this week, his Justice Department wrote a legal opinion saying the entire Affordable Care Act should be struck down. Now, that's not sitting well with lawmakers, including some from the president's own party.
I'm very disappointed and vehemently opposed to the administration seeking to invalidate the entire Affordable Care Act. This is contrary to the tradition of the Justice Department, which generally defends laws.
I just can't believe that they want to, and the Justice Department has said they're not going to enforce the law of the land. That's just unfathomable to me to think that they could say that we're not going to enforce the law that basically was passed in Congress. Well, that's your job. The judicial branch is a job to enforce the laws and policies that we pass.
And joining me now from Washington is Julia Manchester. She's a reporter for The Hill. Welcome, Julia. Great to have you with us. So we just heard from two senators about the president's plan to take on health care reform. What more are you hearing from lawmakers about this?
Yeah, well, we're not hearing much positive reaction out of Capitol Hill from this, the tweet yesterday from President Trump saying that the Republican Party was going to be the party of health care, and the subsequent plans in the Justice Department to repeal Obamacare. You know, we're actually hearing reports that House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy has actually been trying to lobby to get the president to back off of this. We saw that various influential Republican senators, such as Senate Finance Chairman Chuck Grassley and Lamar Alexander, were taken off guard by President Trump's really sudden turn of events and declaring his new focus on health care. But I think it's really worth to point out that this is a huge risk for Republicans politically right now. You know, Democrats ran on the issue of health care, and 75% of voters who said health care was a top priority for them in the midterms actually ended up voting for Democrats in the midterms, according to an NBC News exit poll. So I think that's something that Republicans really have to keep in mind, and something they are concerned about. Another thing that I thought was interesting, we saw that Joe Manchin was just on screen earlier saying how disappointed he was in all of this. Well, Joe Manchin comes from a very red state, even though he's a Democratic senator, and the types of voters from his red state, you know, the working class, blue collar voters that may sometimes sway to Republican but sometimes Democrat, you know, those are the voters that President Trump is really going to try to take a hold of in 2020. And I think he needs to be very cautious in how he approaches this issue.
Right. I mean, I could see the danger there being the more he talks about health care, the more he could highlight the fact that the GOP doesn't really have a health care plan. So, you know, and as you know, Democratic lawmakers have announced a new bill to restore parts of Obamacare that were already gutted by the administration. What are some of their proposals?
Well, I think the Democratic proposal to restore those parts, you know, is only good for them in the long term. You know, I think Democrats realize that with Obamacare being so popular, they can only really improve upon those proposals and improve upon the parts of Obamacare that Republicans have attacked before, such as the higher costs within Obamacare. I think Democrats are going to offer some ideas to try to drive down those costs by, and at the same time, really making that plan accessible to most Americans.
And, you know, let's talk a little bit about what else the Democrats are demanding right now. They are demanding Attorney General Barr turn over the full Mueller report by April 2nd. But, Julia, how much power do Democrats really have to set that sort of a deadline?
Well, we're hearing that Democrats want to, we've heard, I guess, rhetoric from people like House Intelligence Chairman Adam Schiff that they'd like to subpoena parts of the report. But, you know, I think at this point it's kind of going to be a bit of a tug and pull, if you will, between the Democrats and the Justice Department. And I think a lot of this depends on how the Trump administration really wants to see this play out. But however, I think politically for Democrats at this point, they need to proceed with caution. I think a lot of Americans outside of Washington Washington, D.C. or New York City view Robert Mueller's or William Barr's summary of Robert Mueller's final findings into the Russia probe as a final word, if you will, and the end to the probe. And I think Americans are kind of looking to get over the probe, if you will, and move on. And I think it's important for Democrats going into 2020, not just for presidential contenders, but as well as for Senate and House races, to make sure that they also focus on policies such as health care, the economy, job growth, etc. So I think Democrats are really walking a political tightrope in demanding the Mueller report. While everyone wants transparency, I think they also need to keep policies in mind as well.
Well, Julia, to your point, a recent CBS News poll found that 58% of Americans felt that congressional Democrats should drop their investigations and move on to other issues. So Democrats must realize this, right? Are they concerned about some of the political consequences of continuing their investigations into the president? Is it sort of like being caught between a rock and a hard place?
I think they're absolutely concerned. And I think if you watch and read several of the interviews Democratic lawmakers have given this past, over the past 3 days, you're seeing them bring up that, we still need to be concerned about policies and policy reforms and policy ideas, et cetera. However, I think at the same time, they realize how much taxpayer money the Mueller report costs American people. And I think they want to try to make this seem like it wasn't all in vain. I don't think they want to necessarily give up, because we all know that President Trump will brand them as a party that gives up. So I think they're, trying to really balance this while at the same time, appealing to those policy objectives they want to, those goals they want to reach, while at the same time making sure they keep an eye on, these investigations that they have pledged to look into the president.
Right. All right. Moving on to another issue, Julia, I want to play some comments from New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. These were before Tuesday's failed Senate vote to move forward on the Green New Deal. Take a listen to what she said.
This is serious. This should not be a partisan issue. This is about our constituents and all of our lives. Iowa, Nebraska, broad swaths of the Midwest are drowning right now, underwater. Farms, towns that will never be recovered and never come back. And we're here, and people are more concerned about helping oil companies than helping their own families? I don't think so. I don't think so. This is about our lives. This is about American lives.
Now, Julia, those remarks made quite the journey on social media today. A lot of people have seen them and have been commenting on them. Again, we want to point out that the Green New Deal was sort of put to the Senate floor early. She would say, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez would say that as well. And I think this is an effort to try and seriously debate the issue. And she seems to be very passionate about it. Will this become a sort of rallying cry for Democrats?
Absolutely. And Tanya, I will say this. This is why Republicans have to be so careful about pushing Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez aside as an afterthought. She clearly isn't. I mean, the moment this really went viral, I think these remarks were so gripping and they appear to be very genuine. That's going to get a lot of people's attention going into elections like 2020, or when they think about climate change, for that matter. I think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez realized that that Senate vote, the Green New Deal wasn't necessarily going to go anywhere. But with these remarks, with these, I guess, I don't want to call it a performance, but with these remarks she gives, and when she talks about how passionate she is about this policy, why it matters, that's going to really start a debate about climate change. And I think this will go on. This really is the beginning of a wider debate of climate change. And that's something that Republicans and climate change skeptics really need to take seriously.
Absolutely. And beyond the issue of climate change, she also draws the connection between environmental issues and lower income Americans who are disproportionately affected by environmental issues, which is obviously, again, something that both parties will have to come to terms with.
Absolutely.
All right.
And I think
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, I think in the future, for future elections, definitely going into 2020, I think there are a lot of undecided independent voters who maybe are looking at this saying, how can this policy benefit me and my well-being in the future, especially for young Americans, millennials in particular?
It's a big issue for millennials, we know. All right, Julia Manchester, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.